Hey guys, I'm Dave, and this video is about building a small PC with a ton of power. The system you'll see in this video will be used to run theatrical lighting simulations, including pre-visualization renders. I've chosen the Mini-ITX form factor for the motherboard and paired it with the appropriately small Fractal Design Core 500. The Fractal Design Core 500 is a small square case, but not a cube, because it has room for a full-size GPU and a full ATX power supply. It has a couple of great included features: magnetic dust filters, and a bracket that can accommodate a full-length water cooling radiator. But you'll need to remove that bracket to build in the system a little more easily. I've chosen the Gigabyte B450 Pro Wi-Fi for this system. The more expensive X470 chipset wasn't called for, since I'm not going to be using all the features this cheaper motherboard has to offer. Here's some more components I'll be using in this build. We'll get into more detail about each of these in just a bit. The most cores you can currently put into AMD's AM4 socket is 8, with a lower wattage option in the Ryzen 7 2700 and a higher wattage option in the 2700X. When it comes to installing an AM4 CPU into its socket, try not to touch the pins on the bottom of the chip too much. Look for the gold triangle on the CPU and line it up with the small triangle indentation on the socket. Pull back the lever mechanism on the side of the socket, insert the CPU with no additional force, then push the lever firmly down to lock the CPU into the socket. To install your system memory, make sure that you line up the notches in the middle of the RAM module with the notches in the DIMM slot. Then press down firmly on each RAM module until the retention clips click. When installing your CPU cooler, check to see that there's been thermal paste pre-applied. If there isn't, you'll need to get some and apply it before you install the cooler on top of the CPU. The Wraith Prism cooler has two options for controlling its internal RGB lights: a 4-pin RGB cable and a USB cable for software-based RGB sync. Even though this motherboard has the 4-pin RGB header that we would need, I'd still recommend using the included USB cable. The Wraith Prism cooler includes 3 separate zones that you can control the lights for individually, and the USB cable gives you a lot more control than the standard RGB connection to your motherboard. You can find a USB 2 connection here on the B450 Pro Wi-Fi, right next to the more easy to recognize USB 3 header. Before you start installing components, I'd recommend removing both the water cooling bracket at the top of the case, as well as the bracket for a 5 1/4 inch drive and a 3 1/2 inch mechanical disc underneath. You'll need to remove all 4 screws on the top bracket, as well as several screws underneath the front bezel that hold in the 3 1/2 inch and 5 1/4 inch drive bay attachment. Unlike what you see me doing here, I'd recommend installing the motherboard before the power supply in this particular case, but more on that later. When you do install the power supply, make sure you plug in the extension cord that runs to the back of the Fractal case before inserting and tightening the power supply retention screws. I wasn't able to fit the motherboard between the installed power supply and the included 140mm fan. If you install the motherboard before the power supply, you probably won't need to remove the fan, but it's simple enough to do. Don't forget to install a screw on each corner of the motherboard. Next, we'll install the 2.5 inch SSD. You'll need a SATA cable, like the one you see here, as well as a SATA power cable. For modular and semi-modular power supplies, you can find the cable you need bundled in the box with your power supply. The Core 500 makes it easy for you to secure a 2.5 inch SSD, with 2 metal pins for the bottom, leaving only 2 screws to secure it on the top. If you're building in a Mini-ITX case, or any case with tight quarters, I'd recommend plugging in every single cable to the motherboard before you install the GPU if possible. One reason for this is that motherboard manufacturers tend to put the front audio header near or directly under the GPU. In this case, the only fan header for a system fan is also located very close to the PCI Express slot that the GPU gets plugged into. As you can tell, I was forced to remove the GPU to properly route the cables for the fan and the front audio jacks. Plugging cables to the various headers on your motherboard is always a great time to check the manual. Connecting the small wires that run to your status lights and power and reset switches on the front of the case can be challenging in any build, but their location on this motherboard is the primary reason that earlier in this video I recommended installing the motherboard before you install your power supply. Now I can install the GPU for the final time and connect all the power cables to it and the motherboard. Once all your power and data connections are made, it's always a good idea to try to manage the cable a little bit. In a case this small, there aren't a lot of opportunities for style points when it comes to cable management. I'm mostly concerned about airflow. I'm trying to keep the cables away from the CPU cooler fan and leave a clear airflow path to the single exhaust fan at the back of the case. Once everything's plugged in and double checked, it's time to be brave and hit that power button for the first time. Once your system posts to the motherboard screen, you should be ready to put everything back together and close the case up. For the Core 500, don't forget your dust filters. They stick easily onto the top and side of the case panel. Slide the panel onto the chassis and make sure that you get all the tabs lined up before you try to apply any of the thumb screws at the back. Lastly, replace the front bezel by applying firm pressure on all four corners. So I hope you enjoyed this build log and found some of the tips useful if you're looking to build your own low volume, high impact workstation. Don't forget to comment down below, hit the thumbs up button, and get subscribed for more PC builds, tech tutorials, and gaming. Catch you in the next one.